Sometimes the people we lose aren't gone, they're just living a life we can't understand. 3 years ago, Sarah Hartley walked into the Montana wilderness and disappeared, leaving a town to mourn the schoolteacher they'd never see again. Search parties found nothing. The frontier had taken her, and everyone learned to live with the loss. Then a mountain man named Ezra Cole, tracking rumors of a strange wolf pack, found her in a torchlit cave deep in the mountains. She was alive, asleep among wolves that protected her like family. But Sarah didn't want to be rescued. What makes a woman choose wolves over people? And why would wild animals guard her with their lives? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Timber Creek wasn't much to look at, even by Montana Territory standards. A dozen weathered buildings huddled along a muddy main street, their false fronts promising more substance than they delivered. The general store doubled as the post office. The saloon served as town hall when needed. A small church with a leaning steeple stood at the far end, its bell calling the faithful every Sunday morning, whether they wanted to come or not. But it was home to near 200 souls, and in 1887 that was enough to matter. Ezra Cole rode into town on a Tuesday morning in late September, his pack-horse loaded with furs from a summer's worth of trapping. He was a tall man, lean as a lodgepole pine, with a face weathered by 58 years of hard living. Grey threaded through his dark beard. His eyes, the color of river stones, held the kind of quiet that made folks uncomfortable. Not because he seemed dangerous exactly, but because he seemed like a man who'd forgotten how to need people. He tied his horses outside Garrett's general store and stood for a moment, letting the town sounds wash over him. Hammer strikes from the blacksmith shop, women's voices drifting from the seamstress, a dog barking somewhere down by the creek. All of it felt foreign after months alone in the high country. Ezra Cole, as I live and breathe. Martha Garrett stood in the doorway of the store, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a stout woman in her 60s, with kind eyes and a tongue sharp enough to keep her husband in line. Thought maybe the mountains had swallowed you whole this year. Not yet, Martha. Ezra touched the brim of his hat. Though they keep trying. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. There was something there, a weight that hadn't been present last spring when he'd passed through. Got coffee on? Come in and tell me what you've brought. Inside, the store smelled of leather and tobacco and the peculiar mix of everything a frontier settlement needed to survive. Ezra began unloading his furs while Martha poured coffee into tin cups. They negotiated prices with the easy rhythm of people who'd been doing business together for years. She was fair, he was reasonable. Money and credit changed hands. You been up in the northern range? Martha asked, too casual. Mostly. Why? She hesitated, glancing toward the back room where her husband was doing inventory. There's been talk. Trappers coming through, saying they've seen strange things up that way. Wolf sign where there shouldn't be wolves. Tracks that don't make sense. Ezra sipped his coffee. He'd heard similar stories from a pair of Salish hunters he'd encountered in July. They'd spoken of a ghost pack, wolves that moved through the high country like spirits, appearing and disappearing without pattern. He'd thought it was just campfire talk, the kind of tale that grew with each telling. Wolves go where the game is, he said. I know that. Martha's voice dropped lower. But these are different, they say. Organized. Almost like they're protecting something. Before Ezra could respond, the door opened and Sheriff Tom Brennan stepped in, bringing with him the scent of horse and leather. He was a thick-bodied man in his 40s. With a mustache he groomed more carefully than his horse. He'd been sheriff for 3 years, appointed after his predecessor drank himself to death. Cole, Brennan nodded. Didn't expect to see you until spring. Running low on supplies. And here I thought you lived on air and stubbornness. Brennan helped himself to coffee without asking. You see anything unusual up north? We've had reports. There it was again. That same question, wrapped in different words. What kind of unusual? Ezra asked. Brennan exchanged a glance with Martha. Wolf activity, more than normal. Some folks think maybe they've found a new denning ground, might be getting aggressive about territory. Ezra had been trapping these mountains for 30 years. He knew wolf behavior better than most. What the sheriff was describing didn't match any pattern he recognized. Wolves didn't just appear in numbers without reason. They followed food, followed season, followed instinct that was older than the mountains themselves. "I'll keep an eye out," Ezra said, which wasn't quite a lie. After Brennan left, Martha leaned across the counter. "It's been 3 years, Ezra." He didn't need to ask what she meant. Everyone in Timber Creek measured time the same way now, before Sarah Hartley disappeared, and after. "I know. Some folks still hold hope. Her sister back east writes every few months, asking if there's been news." Martha's voice caught. "Those children she taught, they're growing up now, but they still remember her. Still ask about her." Ezra remembered Sarah Hartley, though he'd only met her a handful of times. She'd arrived in Timber Creek 5 years ago, a young widow from Boston, with a teaching certificate and eyes that carried old sorrow. The town had needed a teacher. She'd needed a new start. It had seemed like providence. She'd been good at her work, patient with the children, creative in her methods. She'd started a small library in the church basement, taught Sunday school, organized a Christmas pageant that the whole town talked about for months. In a place where life was hard and distractions few, Sarah Hartley had been a light. Then, on an October afternoon 3 years ago, she'd told the boarding house owner she was going for a walk. She'd taken nothing but her shawl. When she hadn't returned by sunset, folks had gone looking. By morning, half the town was searching. By the end of the week, they'd covered every trail within 10 miles. Ezra had joined the search, more out of obligation than hope. He'd found nothing. No tracks, no torn clothing, no sign of struggle. The wilderness had simply absorbed her, the way it absorbed everything that wandered too far from the safety of civilization. "You were part of the search party," Martha said. "You know these mountains better than anyone. Do you think she's still out there?" It was the question everyone wanted to ask, but few did. 3 years was a long time. A body could last that long, preserved by cold and elevation, hidden in some rocky crevice where no one would think to look. Or it could be scattered by scavengers, returned to the earth in pieces too small to find. "No one survives 3 years alone out there," Ezra said, which was the truth as far as he knew it. Martha nodded slowly. "I suppose not. But sometimes I think about her, you know. Wonder what she was thinking, walking out like that. If she was running from something or toward something. If she knew she wasn't coming back." Ezra finished his coffee and gathered his purchases. He had a camp to make, supplies to organize, and a long winter to prepare for. But Martha's words stayed with him as he led his horses out of town and back toward the mountains that had been his home for more years than he cared to count. He'd lost his own wife, Catherine, 5 years ago. Pneumonia had taken her in 3 brutal days, and he'd been powerless to stop it. After the funeral, he'd sold their small ranch and headed for the high country, trading human company for solitude. The grief had been too heavy to carry among people who wanted him to heal, to move on, to be whole again. The mountains didn't expect anything from him. They just existed, indifferent and eternal. There was comfort in that. But now, riding back toward his traplines, Ezra couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The stories about the ghost pack, Brennan's unusual interest, Martha's questions about Sarah Hartley, they all pointed toward something he couldn't quite name. He made camp that night beside a creek that ran clear and cold from the high peaks. As he sat by his fire, eating beans and bacon, he heard wolves singing in the distance. It was a sound as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. But tonight, listening to their voices echo across the darkness, he heard something different in their chorus. It almost sounded like they were calling to something. Ezra banked his fire and rolled into his bedroll, but sleep was slow to come. Tomorrow he'd head north, toward the territory where the ghost pack supposedly roamed. Not because the sheriff had asked, or because of Martha's questions, but because 30 years in these mountains had taught him to trust his instincts, and his instincts were telling him that the wilderness was holding a secret it was almost ready to reveal. Above him, the stars burned cold and distant. Somewhere out there, wolves sang their ancient songs, and Ezra Cole, who had chosen loneliness over the pain of human connection, wondered if maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the only soul who had fled into the wild to escape the unbearable weight of grief. Ezra spent 5 days tracking north, following rumors and instinct in equal measure. The first real sign came on the 3rd day, wolf tracks near a tributary stream, larger than normal and moving with purpose. Not the wandering pattern of a hunting pack, but something more deliberate. They were patrolling. He followed the tracks higher into the mountains, into territory so remote that even experienced trappers avoided it. The terrain grew brutal, shale slopes that could slide out from under a man's feet, dense pine forests where the sun barely penetrated, ravines that dropped away into darkness without warning. On the 5th morning, Ezra found the silver locket. It hung from a low pine branch beside a game trail, swaying slightly in the mountain breeze. The chain was tarnished but intact. He opened it carefully, his calloused fingers clumsy with the delicate clasp. Inside was a photograph. Faded but still clear enough, a young girl, maybe 4 years old, with ribbons in her hair and a gap-toothed smile. He'd seen Sarah Hartley wear this locket. She'd touched it sometimes while teaching, an unconscious gesture that the children had learned meant she was thinking of something far away and sad. Ezra's pulse quickened. He examined the branch, the surrounding ground. The locket hadn't fallen here by accident. It had been placed deliberately, hung where someone walking this trail would see it, a marker, a warning, or maybe an invitation. He moved forward more carefully now, reading the forest the way other men read books. Fresh wolf scat, still warm, scratch marks on tree bark at shoulder height, wolves marking territory, and something else, something that made the hair on his neck rise. Human footprints, bare, small, alongside the wolf tracks. The trail led him to a ridge overlooking a narrow valley. Below, a waterfall tumbled over black rock, its roar filling the air with white noise. The water fell into a pool that drained into a creek, but there was something odd about the rock face behind the falls. The way the light hit it, the way the water seemed to part slightly in one section. Ezra worked his way down the ridge as the afternoon sun began its descent. He approached the waterfall from the side, moving through the spray until he could see what he'd suspected, a gap behind the falling water, an opening in the rock face large enough for a man to slip through. He hesitated at the entrance. Every instinct he'd honed over 3 decades told him to be cautious. But there was something else, too, something he hadn't felt in years. Curiosity, hope, maybe, though he didn't want to name it that. The passage beyond the waterfall was narrow and slick with moisture. Ezra moved slowly, one hand on the rock wall, letting his eyes adjust to the dimness. After 20 feet, the passage opened up, and he saw the first flicker of firelight. The cave was larger than he'd imagined, a natural cathedral carved by water over countless centuries. Torches burned in crude sconces along the walls, pine branches wrapped with cloth and soaked in animal fat. The flames cast dancing shadows across stone walls marked with strange formations that looked almost deliberate, almost like art. And then he saw the wolves, 7 of them arranged in a loose semicircle near the center of the cave. They'd heard him coming, their ears were forward, bodies tense but not aggressive. The largest, a silver-grey female with pale eyes, watched him with an intelligence that was almost human. She didn't growl, didn't bare her teeth. She simply watched and waited. Beyond the wolves, deeper in the cave, Ezra saw her. Sarah Hartley sat on a pile of furs, her knees drawn up, her hair hanging loose past her shoulders. She wore clothing he didn't recognize at first, leather, crudely sewn but functional, probably deer hide. Her feet were bare. Her face was leaner than he remembered, tanned by sun and weather, with a wildness in her features that transformed her completely. She was awake, watching him with the same careful attention as the wolves. Ezra Cole. Her voice was hoarse, as if she hadn't used it in some time, but steady. "I wondered if it would be you." He couldn't speak at first. The shock of seeing her alive, of seeing her like this, stole his words. The wolves hadn't moved. They remained between him and Sarah, a living wall of fur and muscle. "Miss Hartley," his voice came out rougher than intended, "the town thinks you're dead. I know what they think." She shifted slightly, and the wolves responded immediately, their attention sharpening. "You should leave, Ezra. Go back and tell them you found nothing. It's better that way." "Better for who?" He took a careful step forward. The silver wolf's ears flattened, just slightly. He stopped. "You've been gone 3 years. People grieved for you. There's a memorial stone in the churchyard with your name on it." Something flickered across Sarah's face, pain maybe or regret, but it passed quickly. "I'm sorry for their grief, but that life ended the day I walked into these mountains. I'm not the woman they mourned. You're alive. That's what matters." "Am I?" She stood slowly, moving with a grace he didn't remember. The wolves stood with her, their bodies forming a protective cluster around her legs. "Look at me, Ezra. Really look. Do I seem like someone who belongs in a schoolroom? Someone who could go back to teaching children their letters while the world outside the window calls to me in voices they'll never hear?" He did look. He saw a woman transformed, certainly, but he also saw something else, a calmness, a centeredness that hadn't been there before. The sorrow that had lived in her eyes back in Timber Creek was gone, replaced by something fiercer and more certain. "How did you survive?" he asked. Sarah smiled, a expression both sad and knowing. "I didn't plan to. That first week, I walked until I couldn't walk anymore. I lay down in a meadow and waited to die. I'd lost my daughter to fever back east, lost my husband to grief that made him take his own life. I came west, thinking I could outrun that pain, that teaching other people's children would fill the hole inside me. I was wrong." She moved toward him slowly, the wolves matching her pace. Ezra held his ground, though every muscle in his body screamed at him to run. But these weren't ordinary wolves, and this wasn't an ordinary situation. "I was dying when they found me," Sarah continued. "I'd been lying there for days, slipping in and out of consciousness. And then she appeared." Sarah placed her hand on the silver wolf's head. The animal leaned into her touch, eyes half closed. "Silver. She brought me food, a rabbit, still warm. I was too weak to eat it properly, but I tried. The next day, she came back with the pack. They circled me, studying me like I was a puzzle they couldn't quite solve." "Wolves don't do that," Ezra said. "They don't care for humans. These wolves did. Silver was pregnant, I realized later. She was looking for a den, and she'd found this cave. But there was something wrong with her. I could see it in the way she moved, the way the others treated her with unusual gentleness. When she went into labor a week later, I understood. The birth was difficult, she was going to die, and the pups with her." Sarah's eyes met his across the flickering torchlight. "I'd helped with farm animals as a child. My grandfather had a ranch. I remembered enough. I helped her. 3 pups survived because I was there, because I had hands that could do what no wolf could do. And after that, they didn't see me as prey or threat. They saw me as pack." Ezra shook his head slowly. "Sarah, this isn't natural. You can't live like this." "Can't I?" She spread her arms, encompassing the cave, the wolves, the life she'd built. "I've been here 3 years, Ezra. 3 years of waking with the sun, hunting with the pack, living by rhythms older than any human settlement. I've been cold and hungry and scared. I've also been more at peace than I ever was in civilization. Out here, no one expects me to be anything but what I am. No one pities me for my losses or judges me for my grief. The wolves don't care that I failed to save my daughter or my husband. They only care that I'm here, now, part of their family. The words hit Ezra harder than he'd expected. He understood that feeling, that desperate need to escape the weight of other people's expectations. Hadn't he done the same thing when Catherine died? Fled to the mountains where grief could exist without explanation, without the constant pressure to heal and move forward? "The town needs to know you're alive," he said, but the conviction in his voice had weakened. "Why? So they can force me back? So I can pretend to be the person they remember?" Sarah shook her head. "I won't go back, Ezra. Even if you drag me out of here, I'll just leave again. This is where I belong." The silver wolf, Silver, made a low sound, not quite a growl, but a rumble of awareness. The other wolves shifted, alert. Sarah's head tilted slightly, listening to something Ezra couldn't hear. "You need to go," she said urgently. "Now. The pack doesn't know you. They've accepted your presence because I'm calm, but that can change. If you stay longer, if they perceive you as a threat." "I'm not leaving without answers," Ezra said. 3 years, Sarah. You owe the people who cared about you more than this." Her expression hardened. "I owe them nothing. They loved the idea of me, the tragic young widow who found purpose in teaching their children. But they never knew me. Not really. Out here, I don't have to be anyone's idea of anything. I just am." Ezra stood there, caught between duty and understanding, between the civilized world that demanded he bring her back and the wild truth standing before him. The wolves watched with patient intensity, waiting for a signal from their human pack member. Finally, he stepped backward toward the passage. "I'll camp nearby. Tomorrow we talk more. You owe me that much for keeping your secret this long." Sarah considered this, then nodded slowly. "Tomorrow. But Ezra, if you tell anyone I'm here, if you bring people looking for me, you'll never find this place again. The mountains are vast, and I know how to disappear." He believed her. Ezra retreated through the narrow passage, back through the waterfall's spray, into the failing light of late afternoon. His mind reeled with what he'd seen, what he'd learned. Sarah Hartley was alive. She was living with wolves, and she had no intention of returning to the world that mourned her. He made camp a quarter-mile from the falls, in a sheltered spot where he could watch the approaches. As darkness fell and the temperature dropped, he built a small fire and tried to make sense of everything. The woman in that cave wasn't the Sarah Hartley that Timber Creek remembered. She'd been refined by the wilderness the way a blade is refined by the whetstone, all the softness stripped away, leaving only the essential core. And that core, he'd seen, was far stronger than anyone had imagined. As he settled into his bedroll, wolves began to howl in the distance. He recognized the voices now, Silver's deep, resonant call, answered by the others in a chorus that spoke of territory and family and belonging. And somewhere in that chorus, almost hidden, he thought he heard a human voice joining in. Ezra closed his eyes and wondered what the morning would bring, and whether he had any right to disrupt a life that, however strange, seemed more genuine than anything he'd seen in Timber Creek in years. The days took on a rhythm. Ezra would wake at dawn, build his fire, make coffee. Sarah would appear sometime in the morning, the wolves flowing around her like water around stone. They'd talk, or they'd sit in comfortable silence, or Sarah would demonstrate something she'd learned: how to read the weather from the way the wolves behaved, how to identify edible plants, how to move through the forest without disturbing its patterns. By the end of the first week, Ezra had learned the individual wolves by sight and temperament. Silver, the alpha female, was cautious but fair, a leader who maintained order through presence rather than violence. Her mate, a massive dark wolf Ezra privately called Shadow, was the pack's protector, always alert, always positioning himself between the group and potential danger. There were the three adolescents. Sarah had helped birth Chase, who was bold and curious, Mist, who was gentle and preferred to stay near Sarah, and Runner, who lived up to his name, constantly ranging far and returning with news of the territory. Two other wolves completed the pack, an older male with greying fur around his muzzle that Sarah called Elder, and a young female, sleek and quick, named Swift. "They have personalities," Ezra observed one afternoon as they watched the pack interact near the stream. Chase was trying to get Runner to play, bowing and wagging, while Runner ignored him in favor of drinking. "I always thought of wolves as, I don't know, more uniform." "People think that about a lot of things until they pay attention," Sarah said. "Chase is impulsive, always getting into trouble. Mist is thoughtful, almost cautious. Runner takes his role as scout seriously, even though he's barely 2 years old. They're individuals, same as us." Ezra watched as Elder approached a disputed resting spot where Swift had settled. The younger wolf immediately yielded, moving without any sign of aggression from the older male. It was done with such subtlety that someone not paying attention would miss it entirely. "How do they make decisions?" he asked. "Together, mostly. Silver and Shadow lead, but the others have voices. I've seen them debate about hunting grounds, yes, debate. They'll gather and vocalize back and forth, reading each other's body language. Eventually, a consensus forms. It's not democracy exactly, but it's not dictatorship either." Sarah paused. "It's more honest than most human decision-making I've witnessed." That afternoon, Sarah invited Ezra to observe a hunt. They followed at a distance as the pack moved through the forest with purpose. Silver led, with Shadow ranging to the flank. The younger wolves spread out in a pattern that seemed random, until Ezra realized they were creating a net, a living trap that would funnel prey toward the strongest hunters. They were tracking an elk, a young bull that had wandered too far from his herd. The hunt took 2 hours of patient stalking before the moment came. Runner spooked the elk toward Shadow, who drove it toward Silver. The kill was quick and efficient. No suffering beyond what was necessary. But what struck Ezra most was what happened after. The pack didn't simply tear into the carcass. There was an order, a ritual. Silver fed first, then Shadow, then the others in descending rank. Sarah waited her turn, and when it came, no wolf challenged her position. She fed after Shadow, but before the adolescents. "You're high in the pack order," Ezra said as they walked back toward the cave, the wolves' bellies full, their mood relaxed. "I earned that position, not through dominance but through contribution. I help with hunts when I can. I helped birth the pups. I tend to injuries using knowledge they don't have. I can make poultices from plants, can set a broken bone. The pack values what I bring." She looked at him. "That's all any of us wants, isn't it? To be valued for what we contribute, not pitied for what we lack." That night, Ezra noticed something odd. After the wolves had settled for sleep, Sarah didn't join them in the main chamber. Instead, she took a torch and disappeared deeper into the cave. The wolves, usually so attentive to her movements, seemed unconcerned. They'd done this before. Ezra waited an hour, then 2. When Sarah didn't return, curiosity got the better of him. He approached the cave entrance quietly. Silver raised her head, watching him, but didn't growl. He took that as permission and slipped inside. The main chamber was empty except for the sleeping wolves. Beyond it, the cave extended into darkness. Ezra could see the faint glow of torchlight far back, flickering against stone walls. He moved toward it, careful and quiet. The passage narrowed, then opened into a second chamber, smaller than the first. Sarah stood in the center, her torch illuminating walls covered in markings. Not the random scratches of animals or water erosion, these were deliberate. Ancient drawings in faded red and black pigment, handprints, symbols that looked almost like writing. "I told you that you weren't ready," Sarah said without turning around. "But you're here anyway. What is this place?" Sacred ground. The wolves know it somehow. They never come back here, never mark this chamber. It's as if they understand it belongs to something older than they are. Ezra moved closer, studying the drawings. He saw animals, bison, elk, wolves. He saw human figures, small and stylized. And he saw something else, symbols he didn't recognize, arranged in patterns that suggested meaning beyond decoration. "How long has this been here?" he asked. "Centuries, maybe longer. I found it 6 months after I arrived, when I was exploring the full extent of the cave system." Sarah's voice held a reverence he'd never heard from her before. The people who made these drawings were long gone before the first white settler came west. This was their holy place, their sanctuary. She moved to a flat section of wall where the drawings were most dense. "I've been documenting everything, the images, the symbols, the way they're arranged. I've compared them to drawings I've seen in books about native peoples. This is significant, Ezra. This is their heritage, their history, preserved in stone." "That's why you can't leave," he said, understanding dawning. "You're protecting this place." "I'm trying to." Sarah set her torch in a natural sconce, her face grave in the flickering light. "2 months ago, I found something while exploring the northern ridges. Survey stakes. Unimize the guard, not a side, with anata stakes. Fresh-cut timber marking boundaries. Someone is planning to work this land, and they're not concerned with what they might destroy in the process." She pulled a folded paper from inside her leather shirt. It was water-stained and creased, but still legible. Ezra took it, tilting it toward the light. It was a property deed, dated 6 months before Sarah's disappearance. The land described included the entire mountain, the valley, everything surrounding the cave. "Consolidated Mining Company," Ezra read aloud. "They own this land? They claim to." The deed references an old land grant that supposedly gives them mineral rights. But I don't think that grant was ever valid. I think they're counting on no one questioning it this far out in the wilderness. What do they want with it? Gold, most likely, or silver. These mountains have veins of both. The company will bring in machinery, tear the mountain apart looking for profit. The cave will be destroyed. These drawings will be lost forever. And the wolves, her voice broke slightly, the wolves will lose their territory. They'll be driven out or killed as threats to the operation. Ezra looked at the ancient handprints on the wall, imagined the people who'd put them there. He thought about the wolves sleeping in the outer chamber, unaware that their home was threatened by forces they couldn't understand or fight. "The town doesn't know about this," he said. "Some do. The company has connections in Timber Creek. I heard rumors before I left, didn't think much of them at the time. But now," she took the deed back, folded it carefully. "If I go back, if I tell people what's here, what do you think happens? They'll call me crazy. 3 years living with wolves? Clearly my mind has gone. And even if someone believes me, what power do I have? I'm a woman, alone, with no legal standing. The mining company has lawyers, has money, has influence. But you have evidence. These drawings, the sacred nature of this place. Evidence only matters if someone with authority cares enough to act on it. And the mining company has made sure the right people are in their pocket." Sarah met his eyes. "Sheriff Brennan's brother-in-law works for Consolidated Mining. Did you know that?" Ezra hadn't known, but it made a sick kind of sense. Brennan's interest in the ghost pack, his questions about unusual activity in the northern range, he hadn't been concerned about public safety. He'd been protecting the company's interests. "So you stayed," Ezra said. "You've been watching, documenting, trying to find a way to stop them." "I stayed because I had nowhere else to go. But once I found this chamber, once I understood what was at stake, yes, I decided to fight. Even if the only weapon I have is my presence, my refusal to let them claim this land unopposed." They stood in silence, surrounded by the ghosts of ancient people and the weight of modern greed. Ezra understood now why Sarah had been so reluctant to share everything. This wasn't just about a woman living with wolves. It was about preservation, about standing against powerful forces that saw the wilderness as nothing more than profit waiting to be extracted. "I'll help you," he said. Sarah looked at him, searching his face for certainty. "You don't know what you're offering. If the company realizes someone is interfering with their plans, I know what I'm offering, and I know that some things matter more than safety or comfort." He gestured to the drawings. "This matters. The wolves matter. If I walk away now, I'm no better than the people who are willing to destroy it all for money." For the first time since he'd found her, Sarah smiled, not the sad half-smile she'd shown before, but something genuine and warm. "Then we have work to do." Over the next week, Sarah showed Ezra everything she'd gathered. Hidden in a dry section of the sacred chamber were bundles wrapped in oiled cloth maps she'd copied from the surveyor's stakes, notes about the mining company's timeline, sketches of the cave drawings, even samples of minerals she'd collected from different sections of the mountain. "I've been preparing for 3 years," she explained, spreading the materials across a flat rock. "At first, I didn't know what I was doing, just gathering evidence because it felt like the right thing. But over time, I've built a case. This land was never properly surveyed. The deed references boundaries that don't match the actual geography. And most important, she pulled out a tattered, water-damaged document that looked official. I found it wedged in a crack in the sacred chamber, probably left by someone decades ago who wanted to preserve it." Ezra examined the document carefully. The text was faded, but he could make out enough references to sacred sites, to land that would remain in perpetuity under the protection of the native peoples who'd inhabited it first. "This could invalidate the mining claim," he said, "if we can get it to the right authorities, if they'll listen to a schoolteacher who's been living with wolves." Sarah's expression was grim. "That's the problem, Ezra. I have evidence, but no credibility. Not anymore. Then we find someone who does." Before Sarah could respond, Silver appeared at the chamber entrance. She was agitated, pacing, making low sounds in her throat. The other wolves had gathered in the main chamber, all of them alert and tense. Sarah was on her feet immediately. "Something's wrong." They followed Silver out of the cave and into the late afternoon light. The whole pack was there now, positioned in a defensive formation facing north. In the distance, Ezra heard what had them worried: howling. Multiple wolves, different voices than the pack he'd come to know. "The rival pack," Sarah said quietly. "They've been testing the boundaries for weeks, but this is the closest they've come." Over the next hour, they watched as the situation escalated. The rival pack appeared on a ridge across the valley, 9 wolves, larger and more aggressive in their bearing. Their alpha was a massive grey male, with battle scars visible even from a distance. They were displaced wolves, Sarah explained, pushed from their original territory by early mining surveys the company had conducted to the north. "They need new territory," she said, "and our pack is defending a larger range than usual because they're protecting the cave, protecting me. The rivals see weakness in that overextension." For 3 days, tensions mounted. The packs engaged in distant posturing, howling contests, scent marking along disputed boundaries, brief confrontations that ended with both sides backing down. But Ezra could see the strain it was putting on Sarah's pack. They were exhausted, constantly vigilant, unable to hunt properly while defending such a large area. On the 4th day, the confrontation turned violent. It happened quickly. Chase, the impulsive adolescent, had ranged too far while scouting. The rival pack cornered him in a rocky draw. By the time Silver and Shadow reached him, he was bleeding from a gash on his shoulder, 3 rival wolves harrying him from different angles. The fight that followed was brief but brutal. Silver drove off 2 of the attackers while Shadow engaged the 3rd. Chase managed to break free, limping badly, but he'd taken serious damage. Sarah and Ezra reached them as the pack was retreating toward the cave. Chase was struggling to walk, blood matting his fur. His breathing was labored, and one leg wouldn't bear weight properly. "Help me get him back," Sarah said urgently. Together, they supported the young wolf, while the rest of the pack formed a protective circle. It took an hour to reach the cave, and by then, Chase was barely conscious. Sarah laid him on furs in the main chamber and began examining his wounds by torchlight. "The shoulder's deep but clean," she said, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. "The leg, I think it might be broken." Ezra had tended injured animals before, but never a wolf, never something this wild and potentially dangerous. But Chase was too weak to be a threat. He lay still while Sarah cleaned his wounds with water and crushed yarrow leaves. "I need to set the leg," she said. "Hold him steady." Ezra positioned himself at Chase's head, ready to restrain if necessary. Sarah worked quickly, feeling along the leg until she found the break. Chase whimpered, but didn't snap. When Sarah pulled the bone into alignment, the wolf yelped once, loud and sharp, then went limp. "He's unconscious. Better that way." Sarah splinted the leg, using straight branches and strips of leather, wrapping it tight, but not too tight. "He'll heal if infection doesn't set in, but he'll be vulnerable for weeks." They worked through the night, taking turns watching over Chase while the rest of the pack slept fitfully. Silver checked on her pup regularly, licking his face, lying close to provide warmth. The bond between them was unmistakable, mother and son, pack and family. As dawn approached, Ezra sat with Sarah near the cave entrance. She was exhausted, her hands stained with blood, her face drawn with worry. "The rival pack won't stop," she said. "They're hungry, desperate. The mining surveys destroyed their territory, and now they're looking for anything they can take. Our pack can't hold against them, not while protecting this much ground." "Then we need to solve the mining problem," Ezra said. "We remove the threat that's pushing the rivals south. Maybe they'll move back to their original range." "That's months away. Even if we succeed, Chase needs weeks to heal. The pack is already stretched thin." Sarah looked at him with eyes that held both determination and fear. "I can't protect everything, Ezra. The cave, the wolves, the sacred ground, it's too much for one person." "You're not one person anymore," he reminded her. "You have the pack, and you have me." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was small, almost vulnerable. "I've been alone for so long, relying on myself, trusting only the wolves. Letting you in, letting anyone in, it terrifies me. What if I'm wrong? What if trusting you means everything falls apart?" Ezra understood that fear. He'd felt it after Catherine died, when well-meaning friends and family had tried to help and only made the grief worse. Trust was a risk, especially for people who'd been broken by loss. "You don't have to trust me completely," he said. "Just trust me enough to start. We'll figure out the rest as we go." Sarah nodded slowly, then extended her hand. Ezra took it, feeling the calluses and strength in her grip. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. An agreement between two wounded souls to stand together against forces larger than either of them alone. In the cave behind them, Chase stirred in his sleep. Silver raised her head, watching. The pack was wounded, but not broken. The sacred chamber waited in the darkness, its ancient drawings patient and eternal. And somewhere to the north, the mining company's plans moved forward, unaware that two people and a pack of wolves were preparing to stand in their way. Chase recovered slowly over the next 2 weeks. The young wolf's resilience amazed Ezra. Within days, he was putting weight on the injured leg, and within a week, he was moving around the cave under his own power. Sarah tended him with a mixture of wilderness medicine and gentle care that would have impressed any frontier doctor. But the situation with the rival pack grew worse. They'd tasted blood, sensed weakness. Every few days, they'd probe the territory boundaries, forcing Sarah's pack to respond. The constant vigilance was wearing everyone down. It was during one of these tense standoffs that Sarah made her decision. "I need to show you something," she told Ezra one morning. "The real reason I can never leave. even if the wolves didn't need me. She led him deeper into the cave system than he'd been before, past the sacred chamber with its ancient drawings, into passages that twisted and descended into the heart of the mountain. The air grew cooler, damper. Their torches cast wild shadows on walls that narrowed to barely shoulder width in places. After 20 minutes of careful navigation, the passage opened into a cavern so large their torchlight couldn't reach the far walls. The sound of water echoed in the darkness, an underground river flowing somewhere below, but what caught Ezra's attention were the signs of human activity. Old mining equipment lay scattered across the cavern floor, rusted picks, broken timbers, the remains of ore carts on twisted rails. Someone had worked this space decades ago, maybe longer. There was a mining operation here, Sarah said, her voice echoing strangely in the vast space. Small scale, probably from the 1,840 seconds or 50 seconds, long before Timber Creek existed. They dug into the mountain looking for gold or silver, found something, then abandoned it. She led him to a section of wall where the natural rock had been broken open, creating a shaft that disappeared into darkness. Around the opening, someone had piled stones in a deliberate pattern, a warning marker, in the style of native peoples. "I found this a year ago," Sarah continued. "I was exploring, trying to understand the full extent of the cave system. This shaft goes deep. I've mapped it as far as I dared. It connects to the sacred chamber above through a series of natural fissures." Ezra examined the old mining work, the abandoned equipment. Why did they leave? "Look at the stones," Sarah pointed to the warning marker. "The native peoples knew about this place. They sealed it, marked it as forbidden. My guess is the miners encountered them, were warned off, and decided the gold wasn't worth the fight. Or," she moved her torch closer to the shaft entrance, "they found something that made them leave." Inside the shaft, just visible in the torchlight, Ezra saw scratches on the stone. Not random marks, but deliberate symbols, similar to those in the sacred chamber above, but different in style. These looked urgent, almost frantic. "What is this place?" he asked. "A burial site? Maybe more a place of power, of deep spiritual significance. The drawings upstairs are reverent, carefully made. These markings," Sarah traced one with her finger. "These are protective wards, warnings. The people who made them wanted to ensure this place was never disturbed." She moved to a natural shelf in the rock and pulled out a bundle wrapped in oiled canvas. Inside were more documents, official papers, letters, maps, but also artifacts, stone tools, fragments of pottery, beadwork that still held traces of its original colors. "I've been collecting everything I can," Sarah explained. "Physical evidence that this mountain is sacred ground, protected by treaties that predate any mining claim. This cavern, the burial sites, the artwork, all of it proves that native peoples inhabited and revered this place for generations." Ezra sorted through the papers, his tracker's eyes picking out details. Survey maps that didn't match the mining company's claims. Letters between government officials discussing land rights. And one document that made his blood run cold. A geological survey dated just 6 months ago, marked as confidential property of Consolidated Mining Company. "Where did you get this?" he demanded. "I found their survey camp while they were doing preliminary work. They'd left it unguarded while the crew went down mountain for supplies. I took what I could carry." Sarah's expression was fierce. "I've been documenting their movements, their timeline. They're planning to begin full excavation in 4 months. They'll bring in heavy equipment, dozens of workers. They'll tear this mountain apart." She pulled out one final document, a detailed map of the proposed mining operation. Ezra studied it with growing horror. The plan called for shafts drilled deep into the mountain, explosives to break up rock, a processing facility that would require diverting the river. The cave system would be destroyed. The sacred sites, the wolf habitat, everything Sarah had been protecting, it would all be gone. They can't do this, Ezra said. There are laws, protections for sacred sites. Only if someone enforces them, only if someone with authority and resources cares enough to fight. Sarah's voice was bitter. I'm one woman living with wolves. Who's going to listen to me? The federal government. They have agents who handle Indian affairs, who protect treaty lands. The nearest federal office is in Helena, 3 days' ride from Timber Creek. By the time I could get there, present my case, convince someone to investigate, the company could have started work. And that's assuming they believe me at all. Assuming they don't dismiss me as a mad woman who spent 3 years in the wilderness. Ezra understood her frustration, but he also saw what she couldn't, that giving up wasn't an option. We need someone with credibility, someone the government will listen to. Who? Sheriff Brennan is in the company's pocket. Most of Timber Creek either works for the company or depends on it for trade. The few people who might care don't have the resources to fight. There's Dr. Margaret Chen, Ezra said thoughtfully. She's educated, respected, has credentials from back east. She's also interested in natural science, cultural preservation. If we could convince her, you want to bring someone else here? Sarah's immediate reaction was defensive. Expose the cave, expose the wolves. We need allies, Sarah. You said it yourself, you can't protect everything alone. Dr. Chen is trustworthy. She has no connection to the mining company. And she has the kind of authority that might get federal officials to pay attention. Sarah paced the cavern, her torch casting wild shadows. Ezra could see her warring with herself, the part that wanted to protect her sanctuary at all costs versus the part that knew she needed help. Finally, she stopped. If I agree to this, if I let you bring Dr. Chen here, you need to understand what you're asking. We're not just talking about preservation anymore. We're declaring war on a company that has money, power, and no scruples about destroying anything in its way. I understand. Do you? Sarah's eyes blazed in the torchlight. They've already destroyed the rival pact's territory. If they realize we're interfering, they won't hesitate to make us disappear. An accident in the mountains, a rock slide, wolves attacking isolated travelers. There are 100 ways to explain away inconvenient people in country this remote. I know the risks. Ezra met her gaze steadily. I also know that some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight seems impossible. Sarah studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then we do this carefully. You go back to Timber Creek, but you don't tell anyone you found me. You approach Dr. Chen privately. Explain that you've discovered something significant in the mountains. You bring her here, let her see the evidence, let her make her own decision about getting involved. And if Brennan asks questions, tell him you're still investigating the ghost pack rumors. Tell him you need more time, whatever keeps him from getting suspicious. She gathered the documents back into their protective wrapping. How long will it take? 3 days there, a day to convince Dr. Chen, 3 days back, a week, maybe a little more. A week. Sarah looked around the cavern, at the abandoned mining equipment, at the sealed shaft with its protective wards. In a week, Chase will be stronger. The pack can hold the territory that long, and maybe... She paused, something vulnerable crossing her face. Maybe having help won't be as terrifying as I think. They made their way back through the passages to the main cave. The pack was scattered across the chamber, some sleeping, others grooming, living their lives in the pattern they'd maintained for generations. They didn't know their world was threatened. They just knew this was home, and Sarah was part of it. That night, Ezra sat by his fire, making preparations for the journey back to Timber Creek. Sarah appeared at the edge of the firelight, swift and mist at her sides. I'm trusting you, she said quietly. With my life, with the pack's lives, with everything I've been protecting. Don't make me regret it. I won't. How can you be sure? Ezra looked up at her. This woman who'd chosen wolves over civilization, who'd stood alone against impossible odds for 3 years. Because I know what it's like to lose everything that matters. I won't let that happen to you. Sarah nodded. Then did something unexpected. She stepped forward and embraced him, quick and fierce. "Be careful. The company has eyes everywhere." As she disappeared back into the cave, Ezra felt the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. He was leaving the relative safety of the wilderness to walk back into a web of corruption and greed. But he carried with him evidence that could change everything, and the trust of a woman who'd stopped trusting the world long ago. Above him, stars burned cold and distant. Somewhere in the darkness, wolves sang their nightly chorus, and Ezra Cole, who'd spent 5 years hiding from life, prepared to step back into it with purpose. The journey back to Timber Creek took 3 hard days. Ezra pushed himself, covering ground quickly while staying alert for any sign he was being watched. Sarah's warning about the company having eyes everywhere stuck with him. In country this remote, a man traveling alone was always vulnerable. He reached the town just after sunset on the 3rd day, his horses tired, his own body aching from the pace he'd set. The main street was quiet. Most folks had gone home for supper. Warm light glowed from windows. The smell of wood smoke and cooking meat drifted on the evening air. It should have felt welcoming, but Ezra saw it differently now. Somewhere in this peaceful-seeming town, people were planning to destroy a sacred mountain for profit. He stabled his horses at the livery and walked to the boarding house where he usually stayed when in town. Martha Garrett was there, helping her sister who ran the place. Her face lit up when she saw him. "Ezra Cole, you're back sooner than I expected. Find anything interesting up north?" "Still tracking the ghost pack," he said, keeping his voice casual. "Thought I'd resupply before heading back out." "You planning to stay out there all winter?" Martha's concern was genuine. "Those mountains get brutal come December." "I've weathered worse." She studied him with the knowing eyes of someone who'd lived long enough to recognize when people were holding back. "You look like a man carrying weight. You sure everything's all right?" "Just tired, Martha. It's rough country up there." He excused himself and went to his room, but he couldn't settle. Everything felt wrong now, the comfortable bed, the solid walls, the safety of civilization. He kept thinking about Sarah in her cave, about the wolves standing guard, about sacred ground that had survived centuries only to face destruction by modern greed. At first light, Ezra walked to Dr. Margaret Chen's house on the edge of town. She was an unusual presence in Timber Creek, a Chinese-American woman with a medical degree from a university back east who'd chosen frontier life over the prejudice and limitations she'd faced in cities. She was respected for her skill, though some folks still wouldn't see a woman doctor, let alone a Chinese one. Her house was small but well kept, with a garden that somehow thrived despite the harsh climate. Ezra found her in her study, surrounded by books and scientific journals, a cup of tea steaming at her elbow. "Mr. Cole," she looked up, surprised. "I wasn't expecting you." "No, ma'am. I need to speak with you about something important, something confidential." Dr. Chen's expression shifted to careful attention. She was in her early 40s, with sharp eyes that missed little and a directness Ezra appreciated. "Please, sit. What is this about? I need your word that what I'm about to tell you stays between us. No matter what you decide to do with the information, you have it." Ezra took a breath and began. He told her about the ghost pack, about tracking them to the cave. He told her about finding Sarah Hartley alive, living with wolves in a way that defied everything civilized people understood about the natural world. He told her about the sacred chamber with its ancient drawings, about the mining company's plans, about the evidence Sarah had gathered. Dr. Chen listened without interrupting, her face revealing nothing. When Ezra finished, she sat in silence for a long moment. "You're asking me to believe," she said finally, "that Sarah Hartley has survived 3 years in the wilderness, living with a wolf pack, and has single-handedly been fighting to preserve sacred ground from a mining operation. I'm not asking you to believe anything. I'm asking you to come see for yourself." "Why me?" "Because you have credentials that matter. Because you're interested in natural science and cultural preservation, because you have no ties to the mining company. Ezra leaned forward. And because Sarah needs an ally who can't be easily dismissed as crazy or unreliable. Dr. Chen stood and paced to the window, looking out at her garden. If what you're saying is true, the artifacts alone would be significant. The cultural implications, the scientific value. She turned back to him. But you're also describing an impossible situation. A woman living as part of a wolf pack goes against everything we understand about animal behavior. I know how it sounds. That's why I need you to see it. And if I refuse, then Sarah stays out there alone, fighting a battle she can't win, and a sacred site gets destroyed because no one with authority cared enough to investigate. Dr. Chen returned to her chair, studying Ezra with those sharp eyes. You've changed since I saw you last spring. You seem, I don't know, more alive somehow. As if you've remembered there are things worth caring about. The observation caught Ezra off guard. He'd been so focused on Sarah's mission that he hadn't examined his own transformation. But Dr. Chen was right. Somewhere in the past weeks, he'd stopped just surviving and started living again. Will you come? He asked. Give me a day to prepare. I'll need my camera equipment, supplies for documentation. If the drawings are as significant as you say, we'll need photographic evidence. Relief flooded through him. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. If this is real, we're taking on powerful interests. I want to be prepared for what that might mean. Ezra spent the rest of the day gathering supplies, trying to stay inconspicuous. But Timber Creek was a small town, and word spread fast. By afternoon, Sheriff Brennan had tracked him down at the general store. Cole. Brennan's voice was friendly, but his eyes were calculating. Heard you came back from the mountains. Any luck with those wolves? Still tracking them. Heading back out tomorrow. Tomorrow? Brennan's eyebrows rose. You just got back. Don't you need rest? I'm fine. You seem awfully determined about this ghost pack business. Makes a man wonder what you're really looking for out there. Ezra met the sheriff's gaze steadily. Just doing what you asked, investigating the unusual wolf activity. Right. Brennan didn't look convinced. Thing is, I've been hearing things. Miners working up north say someone's been snooping around their survey sites. Taking things. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Mass. I stay clear of mining operations. Too much noise, too many people. Scares off the wildlife. Course you do. Brennan stepped closer, lowering his voice. Let me be straight with you, Cole. The mining company brings jobs, brings money to this territory. Folks depend on that. If someone was interfering with their work, causing delays or stealing property, that would be a serious problem. You understand what I'm saying? I understand you're worried about things that don't concern me. Everything in my jurisdiction concerns me. Brennan's friendly mask slipped slightly. You head back out to those mountains, you be careful. Lot of dangerous things up there. Rock slides, avalanches, wild animals. Man could get hurt if he's not paying attention to where he's going. It wasn't subtle. Brennan was warning him off, using the threat of accidents to make his point clear. Ezra felt anger rise in his chest, but kept his expression neutral. I appreciate your concern, Sheriff. I'll be careful. That evening, Dr. Chen came to his room at the boarding house after dark. She carried a large pack and her photographic equipment in a sturdy case. We leave before dawn, she said quietly. I told my neighbors I'm going to visit a patient in the hills. That should buy us a week before anyone gets suspicious. Brennan's already suspicious. He warned me off this afternoon. Dr. Chen's expression hardened. Then we don't have much time. If the company realizes we're investigating, they might move their timeline up. They left Timber Creek in the pre-dawn darkness, 2 riders heading north with pack horses carrying supplies and equipment. Ezra set a fast pace, but not so fast as to exhaust the horses. They had 3 days of hard riding ahead. On the second day, they spotted riders in the distance, two men on a ridge, watching. Dr. Chen noticed them too. "Company scouts?" she asked. "Maybe. Or just trappers." But Ezra didn't believe it, and neither did Dr. Chen. They'd been marked, their journey noted. When they made camp that night, Ezra kept watch while Dr. Chen slept. The wilderness that had always felt like sanctuary now felt exposed, dangerous. They reached the waterfall on the afternoon of the third day. Ezra helped Dr. Chen navigate the slippery passage behind the falls, his torch lighting the way. As they emerged into the main cave chamber, the wolves were waiting. Dr. Chen froze at the sight of them, 7 pairs of eyes reflecting torchlight, 7 wolves arranged in a defensive formation that spoke of intelligence and purpose. Then Sarah stepped forward from deeper in the cave, and Dr. Chen's breath caught. "Miss Hartley?" The doctor's voice was barely a whisper. "You're alive." "Dr. Chen." Sarah nodded, her posture wary but not hostile. Ezra said, "You might be willing to help." Dr. Chen seemed at a loss for words, her scientific mind struggling to process what her eyes were seeing. "This is impossible." "So I've been told." Sarah moved closer, the wolves parting to let her through. "But here I am anyway." Over the next hour, Sarah showed Dr. Chen everything: the sacred chamber with its ancient drawings, the evidence she'd gathered about the mining operation, the artifacts and documents hidden in the deeper caverns. Dr. Chen moved through it all in a daze, occasionally stopping to photograph or take notes, her hands shaking slightly. When they finally returned to the main chamber, Dr. Chen sat heavily on a rock outcropping. "This changes everything. The cultural significance alone, these drawings, these artifacts, they prove continuous habitation and sacred use going back centuries. The mining claim can't possibly be valid." "Can you help us prove that?" Sarah asked. "I can document everything. I can write reports, submit them to federal authorities." "But Sarah," Dr. Chen looked at her seriously, "the moment we do this, you become visible again. People will know you're alive. There will be questions, demands, expectations." "I know." Sarah's voice was steady. "I've had 3 years to prepare for that. I'm ready to face it, as long as it means protecting this place." Ezra felt something shift in that moment, a transition from preparation to action, from planning to commitment. They had the evidence. They had an expert witness. Now they just needed to get the information to someone who could act on it before the mining company realized what was happening. "The nearest federal marshal is in Helena," Dr. Chen said. "If we can get this evidence to him, along with my professional assessment, he'd be obligated to investigate." "That's a 6-day round trip," Ezra calculated. "Can the pack hold the territory that long?" Sarah looked at her wolves, at Silver watching them with patient intelligence. "We'll have to. This is our only chance." "Then I leave tomorrow," Dr. Chen said. "I'll ride hard, present everything to the marshal, and pray he takes it seriously." "Not you," Ezra said. "You stay here, continue documenting. I'll go. I know the fastest routes, and I can handle myself if the company tries to interfere." "Ezra," Sarah started to protest. "She's right, and you know it. You need to stay with the pack. Dr. Chen needs to finish her documentation. I'm the only one who can make this ride." Sarah studied him, and he saw the conflict in her eyes, the need to protect her sanctuary versus the knowledge that sometimes protection meant letting others take risks on your behalf. "All right," she said finally, "but you need to know what you're riding into. If Brennan gets word that you're going to Helena, if the company realizes what you're carrying, I'll be careful." Careful might not be enough. Sarah pulled something from her pouch, a small token carved from bone, a wolf's head with remarkable detail. "Take this. If you need to prove I sent you, show this to the marshal. He'll know it's genuine." Ezra took the carving, felt its weight in his palm. It was more than a token, it was a symbol of trust, of the alliance they'd built. I won't let you down. As Ezra prepared his gear for the journey to Helena, the wolves gathered near the cave entrance. They seemed to sense something important was happening, their attention focused and alert. Silver approached him, studied him with those pale eyes, then touched her nose to his hand, a gesture of acceptance that made Sarah's eyes widen. "She's never done that with anyone but me," Sarah said softly. "What does it mean?" "It means she trusts you, that you're packed now." Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. A storm was coming, and with it, the final confrontation that would determine whether a sacred mountain survived or fell to the relentless machinery of profit and progress. Sarah knew something was wrong before she saw the smoke. The wolves were agitated, pacing, their attention fixed on the northern ridge. Silver stood at the cave entrance, ears forward, a low growl rumbling in her chest. Even the injured Chase struggled to his feet, favoring his healing leg but ready to fight. Dr. Chen emerged from the sacred chamber where she'd been photographing the final sections of drawings. "What is it?" "Company men," Sarah said grimly. "They're early." They climbed to a vantage point above the cave and saw the column of workers making their way up the mountain, 24 men, pack mules laden with equipment, axes and saws, glinting in the morning light. They were making camp at the base of the valley, right where the mining operation would begin. "They're not supposed to start for months," Dr. Chen said, disbelief in her voice. "They know we're on to them. Brennan must have warned them." Sarah's jaw clenched. "They're going to rush the work, destroy evidence before any federal authority can investigate. We have to stop them." "How? We're 2 women and a wolf pack against 24 armed men." But even as Sarah said it, she was already planning. The wolves couldn't fight humans with guns that would be suicide, but they could use the terrain, use fear, use the natural advantage of defending ground they knew intimately. Over the next hours, Sarah and Dr. Chen worked frantically. They moved the most important artifacts deeper into the cave system, securing them in chambers the mining crews wouldn't reach easily. They documented everything they could with Dr. Chen's remaining photographic plates. They prepared. That afternoon, 3 men broke off from the main camp and started climbing toward the waterfall. Scouts, looking for the best route for heavy equipment. Sarah watched from hiding as they approached. Wolves crouched in the brush around her. "Not yet," she whispered to Silver. "Let them get close." The men reached the waterfall, stood marveling at it. One pulled out surveying equipment. That's when Sarah gave the signal. The wolves emerged from the forest like ghosts, 7 of them forming a semicircle around the scouts. They didn't attack, they didn't need to. The sheer presence of that many wolves, working together with obvious intelligence, was enough to send the men scrambling backward, shouting in panic. They retreated down the mountain at a run, not stopping until they reached camp. Sarah could hear the commotion even from a distance, imagined the story being told with wild gestures and disbelieving reactions. Men didn't expect wolves to hunt them, to coordinate like military units. The fear would spread through the camp like wildfire. But fear wouldn't stop them forever. That night, fires blazed in the workers' camp. Sarah watched from her ridge, Dr. Chen beside her. "They'll come in force tomorrow," Dr. Chen said quietly. "Fear will only delay them so long. Eventually, greed wins. Then we hold them 1 more day. Give Ezra time to reach Helena, time to get help." Sarah looked at the older woman. "You should leave. Get down mountain while you can. This isn't your fight." "Yes, it is." Dr. Chen's voice was firm. "The moment I saw those drawings, the moment I understood what was at stake, it became my fight too. I'm not leaving." Far to the north, Ezra Cole rode through darkness, his exhausted horse stumbling with fatigue. He'd been riding for 40 hours straight, stopping only to walk the horse when it could run no more, pushing both of them past reasonable limits. Helena appeared in the pre-dawn light, its buildings solid and permanent in ways frontier towns never achieved. Ezra rode straight to the federal office, tied his spent horse outside, and walked in with documents in hand. The marshal was a lean man in his 50s, named Warren Kane, with grey hair and the kind of eyes that had seen everything twice. He listened to Ezra's story with growing intensity, examining the photographs, reading the documentation, studying the treaty fragments. "This is substantial," Kane said finally. "But you're asking me to stop a legally sanctioned mining operation based on evidence collected by a woman who's been missing for 3 years, documented by a doctor with no archaeological credentials. I'm asking you to investigate before irreplaceable cultural heritage is destroyed. Send your own experts if you don't trust ours. But send them now, today, before the company starts blasting." Kane stood, paced his office. "If I do this, if I'm wrong, the political fallout will end my career. The mining company has powerful friends in territorial government. And if you don't," Ezra said quietly, "sacred ground gets destroyed, and you'll have to live with knowing you could have stopped it." The marshal studied him for a long moment. "You rode hard to get here. Why does this matter so much to a mountain man who spent years avoiding people? Because sometimes running from life means missing the things worth living for. And that mountain, those wolves, that woman who chose wilderness over surrender, they're worth fighting for." Kane nodded slowly, then called for his deputies. "Get horses ready. We ride in 1 hour. Send a wire to the territorial governor's office. Tell them we're investigating possible treaty violations and federal crimes. And someone get this man coffee before he falls over." Ezra sagged against the wall, exhaustion crashing over him now that he'd completed his mission. He'd made it. Help was coming. He just prayed it would arrive in time. The mining crew made their move on the morning of the 3rd day. 20 men, armed and determined, started up the mountain with equipment and explosives. Sarah watched them come, her heart pounding, knowing the wolves couldn't stop this many humans. They could delay, harass, create obstacles, but eventually numbers would win. Dr. Chen had set up a defensive position near the cave entrance, camera ready to document whatever happened. "We bear witness," she said firmly. "Even if we can't stop them, we make sure the world knows what was destroyed." The workers reached the halfway point when Sarah heard something that made her breath catch hoofbeats, many of them coming fast from the north. She turned to see riders cresting the ridge, a column of federal marshals with Ezra Cole leading them. Marshal Kane rode at the front, his badge glinting in the morning sun. Behind him came 6 deputies, all armed, all wearing the authority of the federal government. They positioned themselves between the mining crew and the sacred mountain, and Kane's voice rang out across the valley. "By order of the United States federal government, this operation is suspended pending investigation of treaty violations and illegal trespass on protected lands. All workers are to cease activity immediately and return to camp." The mining foreman, a thick-set man with a face like carved granite, pushed forward. "We have legal claim to this land, signed, sealed, and registered. Your claim is under review. The documents we've examined suggest significant irregularities in the original land grant." Kane gestured to his deputies. "These men will escort you off the mountain. You can contest our authority in federal court. The company won't stand for this. The company can take it up with the territorial governor, who's been informed of this situation. Now move your crew down mountain, or I'll arrest every man here for interfering with a federal investigation." It took another hour of tense standoff, but eventually the mining crew began their retreat. Consolidated Mining's foreman made threats about lawyers and political pressure, but he went. The workers went. The equipment was packed up and hauled away, leaving the mountain quiet once more. Sarah emerged from hiding as the last of the crew disappeared down the trail. She stood before Marshal Kane, suddenly aware of how she must look: wild hair, leather clothing, bare feet, every inch the woman who'd spent 3 years living with wolves. "Miss Hartley, I presume," Kane said, dismounting. "You've caused quite a stir." "I've caused nothing. I've only tried to protect what should never have been threatened." Sarah's voice was steady despite her racing heart. "Will your investigation be thorough?" "It will. I've already sent for experts from the Smithsonian and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. They'll document everything, verify the significance of the site. Based on what Mr. Cole has shown me, I believe we can prove the original land grant was fraudulent. This mountain will be designated protected territory. And the wolves? Protected as well. The whole area will be preserved. Kane studied her with frank curiosity. The question is, what about you? You've been declared dead. People mourned you. Coming back will be complicated. Sarah looked at Dr. Chen, who joined them, then at Ezra, who watched from his exhausted horse with quiet pride. She thought about the wolves waiting in the cave, about the 3 years she'd spent learning to live in her own skin without apology or explanation. I don't want to come back, she said. Not to what I was before. But I can't hide forever either. Dr. Chen stepped forward. I have a proposal. The federal government will need someone to oversee this protected site. Someone who understands both its cultural significance and its natural ecosystem. Miss Hartley is uniquely qualified. She could serve as official guardian and researcher, documenting the wolves, maintaining the sacred sites, educating others about preservation. Kane considered this unorthodox, but not without precedent. There are forest rangers, wilderness guides employed by the government. Miss Hartley would need to agree to certain conditions, regular reports, occasional inspections, cooperation with scientific teams. I can do that, Sarah said, as long as I can maintain my relationship with the pack, as long as the mountain is protected. Then we'll make it official. Kane extended his hand. Welcome to federal service, Miss Hartley. Over the next weeks, the transformation became official. The Smithsonian sent archaeologists who documented the sacred chamber in detail, publishing papers that brought national attention to the site. The Bureau of Indian Affairs confirmed the treaty violations, and Consolidated Mining's claim was voided. Sheriff Brennan resigned under pressure, his connection to the company exposed. Sarah built a small cabin near the cave, a place to meet with officials and visiting researchers, though she still spent most nights with the wolves. Dr. Chen became a regular visitor, continuing her documentation of the pack's behavior and the site's cultural significance. And Ezra Cole, who'd spent 5 years running from Human Connection, found himself staying. He built his own cabin a mile from Sarah's, close enough to help, but far enough to respect her need for wilderness. He became assistant guardian of the protected lands, using his tracking skills to monitor the territory. The rival wolf pack, no longer pressed by mining activity, moved back to their traditional territory. Chase's leg healed completely, and he grew into a strong, confident wolf. Silver's pack thrived, protected by federal law and by a woman who'd chosen them over civilization. On a crisp autumn evening, exactly 4 years after Sarah had walked into the wilderness expecting to die, she stood on her familiar ridge, watching the sun set over the protected mountain. Dr. Chen sat beside her, and Ezra stood nearby, the 3 of them comfortable in shared silence. "Do you ever regret it?" "Doctor?" Chen asked. "The life you gave up, the person you used to be." Sarah thought about Mary, about the grief that had driven her into the wild. She thought about the wolves who'd saved her, and the sacred ground she'd fought to protect. She thought about finding purpose in the last place she'd expected. "I regret nothing," she said simply. "I lost my way for a while, but the wilderness showed me who I was meant to be. Not the person others needed me to be, but who I am when all the pretense falls away." Below, the wolves began their evening song. Sarah joined them, her voice rising with theirs, in a chorus that spoke of belonging and freedom and the fierce joy of living true to one's nature. Ezra listened, and for the first time in 5 years, he felt something close to peace. The mountains had given him what civilization never could not escape from grief, but transformation through it. Like Sarah, like the wolves, he'd found his place in the wild spaces between human expectation and authentic existence. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, Sarah descended to the cave where her pack waited. Tomorrow, Scientists would arrive to continue their documentation. Next week, she'd submit her monthly report to the federal government. But tonight, she was simply part of the pack, a woman who'd chosen wolves and wilderness and won the right to live on her own terms. The frontier was changing, growing more civilized with each passing year. But here, on this protected mountain, a different kind of civilization thrived, one built on respect for what came before, on preservation rather than conquest, on the radical idea that some things mattered more than profit or progress. Sarah Hartley had walked into the wilderness to die 3 years ago. Instead, she'd found a way to live, and in saving a sacred mountain and its wolf pack, she'd saved herself. The wolves sang, the mountain stood eternal, and a woman who'd been lost had finally found her way home.